The Galactic Federation had classified Earth as a death world. The humans who evolved there should have been formidable warriors, hardened by their harsh environment. Instead, when Federation scientists first contacted Earth, they found something perplexing. Humans were physically unimpressive. No natural armor, no claws, no venom. Their bones broke easily. Their skin tore at the slightest impact. Their muscles were weak compared to most spacefaring species. The Federation's initial report labeled humans as paradoxical death worlders, creatures that had somehow survived a hostile environment despite their obvious physical limitations. This classification remained unchanged for 200 years. Then came the Krell invasion. Grand Admiral Zexos of the Krell Dominion studied the holographic display showing Earth's defenses. His chitinous mandibles clicked in anticipation. The blue-green planet would make a perfect addition to the Dominion's growing collection of conquered worlds. The Krell had already subjugated 17 spacefaring civilizations. Humans would be the 18th. Their orbital defenses are minimal, reported Science Officer Vrax, her compound eyes reflecting the display's light. They have primitive, kinetic weapons, basic energy shields, and a small fleet of short-range vessels. Zexos scraped his armored claws together, a gesture of satisfaction among the Krell. And their ground forces, he asked. Unimpressive, Vrax answered. Their soldiers rely on projectile weapons and have no natural defenses. Their bodies are easily damaged. The Grand Admiral's antennae twitched with amusement. The Federation's reports were accurate. These humans are physically weak. Paradoxical indeed that they survived on such a hostile world. Commander Krill, head of military intelligence, stepped forward. Admiral, there is one curious detail in the Federation's files. When they updated their classification on humans, 80 years ago, they added a warning. Caution, unconventional threat potential. Zexos dismissed the concern with a wave of his claw. The Federation is overly cautious. They see threats everywhere. Perhaps, Krill agreed reluctantly. But it might explain why no other empire has attempted to conquer Earth, despite its obvious vulnerability. The Grand Admiral turned to face his commanders. His exoskeleton gleamed under the command ship's lights. The Krell Dominion fears no unconventional threats. We will take Earth within one planetary rotation. Prepare the invasion force. As the massive Krell warships entered Earth's atmosphere, humans across the planet watched their approach. In the United Earth Defense Headquarters beneath Mount Cheyenne, General Maya Chen studied the tactical display with a calm expression that belied the gravity of the situation. They're deploying ground forces in all major population centers, reported her aide, Colonel Jackson. Exactly as we expected, Chen nodded. And the civilian evacuations? 95% complete. The remaining 5% are either in transit or have chosen to stay. The general's expression darkened at this last part. Some people never follow orders. Jackson hesitated before asking, Ma'am, will Protocol Omega be necessary? Chen touched the small pendant she wore around her neck. A habit when she was deep in thought. Let's hope not, Colonel, but prepare the transmission just in case. In New Beijing, Krell dropships landed in the central plaza. Armored warriors emerged, their segmented bodies towering over the few humans who remained in the area. Sergeant Vrex, leading the ground assault, scanned the buildings surrounding the plaza. His thermal sensors detected scattered human life signs, but no organized resistance. Secure the area, he ordered his troops. Take any humans you find for processing. The Krell moved through the empty streets, weapons ready. They were the elite of the Dominion's military, genetically engineered for combat, with natural armor that could withstand most projectile weapons and enhanced strength that made them living tanks. Compared to humans, they were unstoppable. In an apartment overlooking the plaza, Professor Li Wei watched the aliens through his window. The elderly mathematics teacher had refused evacuation, despite his daughter's pleas. He sipped his tea calmly as armored invaders moved through the streets below. When the pounding came at his door, he didn't flinch. 3 Krell soldiers burst into his apartment, weapons aimed at his fragile human body. "You will come with us," the lead soldier ordered in heavily accented standard. Professor Lee set down his teacup. "May I ask where you're taking me?" The Krell seemed surprised by the old man's calm demeanor. "To processing. You will serve the Dominion now." Professor Lee sighed. "I see, and if I refuse?" The aliens made the clicking sound that passed for laughter among their kind. "Then you die, human. Choose quickly." Professor Lee glanced at the framed photograph on his wall, himself as a younger man, wearing a military uniform. "I should mention," he said, still perfectly calm, "that I was a communications specialist in the United Earth Defense Force before I became a teacher." The Krell soldiers didn't understand the significance. "Your previous function is irrelevant," the leader responded. "You serve the Dominion now." Professor Lee smiled sadly. "I'm afraid I can't do that, and I should warn you. You really should have checked the Federation's updated files on humans." Before the Krell could respond, Lee pressed a hidden button on his watch. Across the planet, thousands of other humans who had refused evacuation did exactly the same thing. On the Krell command ship, alarms suddenly blared. "Admiral!" Science Officer Vrax called out, her voice rising with concern. "We're detecting a massive energy surge from the planet's surface." Grand Admiral Zexos rushed to the main view screen. "What kind of weapon?" he demanded. "Unknown," Vrax replied, her claws moving frantically over the control panel. "The energy signature doesn't match any known weapon type. It's not directed. In our ships, it appears to be a transmission." Zexos's mandibles clicked in confusion. "A transmission? To whom?" Commander Krill answered, his voice tight with sudden fear. "To everyone, Admiral. Every sentient being within 50 light-years of this system." In New Beijing, the Krell soldiers surrounding Professor Lee suddenly froze. Their bodies remained standing, but something had changed. Their compound eyes, usually shifting constantly to track potential threats, became fixed and unmoving. Professor Lee watched with scientific curiosity as the aliens stood perfectly still, like statues. The same scene was playing out wherever Krell forces had made contact with the seemingly helpless humans who had stayed behind. In New York, in Lagos, in Sydney. Invaders suddenly stopped mid-action, becoming living statues. Aboard the command ship, Grand Admiral Zexos felt a strange sensation spreading through his mind. It began as a whisper, then grew to a roar. Thousands, then millions of voices speaking directly into his consciousness. Not in words, but in something more primal, more fundamental. "What is happening?" he demanded, but his officers seemed equally affected. Science Officer Vrax stared at her readings in disbelief. "The transmission, it's not data, it's..." She struggled to find the right word. "Emotions, memories, experiences. But encoded somehow, directly accessing our neural pathways." Commander Krill collapsed to the deck, his exoskeleton clattering against the metal floor. "Make it stop," he pleaded, his voice suddenly small and frightened. "So much suffering! So much determination!" In the United Earth Defense Headquarters, General Chen monitored the situation. "Protocol Omega is at full strength," Colonel Jackson reported. "All Krell forces have been neutralized." Chen nodded, her expression solemn. "And our people?" "The transmitters are functioning as designed. Once their part was complete, they entered protective stasis. Medical teams are moving in to retrieve them now." The general closed her eyes briefly. "They knew the risks. Prepare for Phase 2. Jackson hesitated. "The diplomatic team is ready, but is it really possible to negotiate after this?" Chen's expression was unreadable. "The Krell gave us no choice, but what comes next is always a choice." 12 hours after the invasion began, it was over. Not a single shot had been fired by the human defenders. Not a single human life had been lost. The Krell invasion force, over 30,000 elite warriors, stood immobilized across Earth's surface. Their ships hung motionless in orbit, crews frozen in place. Grand Admiral Zexos, once the proud leader of the Dominion's military, sat slumped in his command chair. His exoskeleton damp with stress secretions, his compound eyes staring at nothing. When the small human shuttle docked with his command ship, he didn't react. When General Chen walked onto his bridge, accompanied by only 2 unarmed diplomats, he barely noticed. Grand Admiral Zexos, Chen addressed him formally. Can you understand me? Slowly, with visible effort, Zexos focused his compound eyes on the human. What did you do to us? He managed to ask, his voice barely audible. Chen approached him, seemingly unafraid despite being surrounded by Krell who towered over her. We shared ourselves with you, she answered simply. Our history, our suffering, our determination, our humanity. Zexos's mandibles trembled. Impossible. No species can transmit consciousness. Chen smiled slightly. Not consciousness. Something more fundamental. Something we discovered 80 years ago when we first realized we weren't alone in the galaxy. One of the human diplomats stepped forward. Your scientists classified us as paradoxical death worlders, she explained. You wondered how we survived on such a hostile planet despite our physical limitations. She gestured toward the immobilized. Krell officers. This is how. We call it the Omega Resonance, a technology that allows us to share our collective emotional experiences directly with other sentient minds. Zexos struggled to comprehend. A weapon, he managed to say. Chen shook her head. No, Admiral, a defense mechanism. We developed it after centuries of fighting ourselves. We learned the hard way that physical weapons only create more suffering. You see, continued the diplomat, humans spent thousands of years killing each other. We became experts at warfare, at destruction. Then we realized that our greatest strength wasn't our capacity for violence, it was our capacity for empathy, for understanding suffering and wanting to end it, she approached one of the frozen Krell officers, looking up at its immobilized form. Your soldiers aren't dead or even injured. They're processing, experiencing in a compressed form the entirety of human history. Our wars, our famines, our plagues, our triumphs over adversity, our capacity for both cruelty and kindness. General, Chen stepped closer to Zexos. You came to conquer us because you saw us as physically weak. What you didn't understand is that our physical limitations are what made us strong in other ways. We couldn't rely on natural armor or superior strength to survive on Earth. We had to develop something else. Zexos's antennae drooped. Compassion, he whispered, the word strange on his mandibles. Yes, Chen confirmed, and its opposite, the knowledge of what happens when compassion fails. Your soldiers and crew are experiencing both right now, the best and worst of humanity. The process will end soon, the diplomat explained. When it does, your people will be changed. Not controlled, we don't want slaves. But they will understand, on the deepest level possible, what it means to be human. What it means to be physically invulnerable but emotionally resilient. Zexos managed to lift one trembling claw. The Federation warned us. Unconventional threat potential. Chen nodded. They discovered our capability decades ago. They chose to respect our borders. We hoped others would do the same. 3 days later, the Krell fleet departed Earth's orbit. There had been no formal surrender, no signing of treaties. None were needed. Grand Admiral Zexos stood on his command bridge, watching the blue-green planet recede on the view screen. He was changed. His entire crew was changed. They had experienced, in a matter of hours, the entire emotional history of humanity. They had felt the fear of early humans facing predators with nothing but sharpened sticks. They had experienced the horror of warfare, from ancient battles to nuclear devastation. They had known the grief of plagues and the joy of cures discovered. They had felt the determination that drove humans to overcome every obstacle their harsh world had placed before them. Set course for the Dominion capital, Zexos ordered, his voice steady, but different somehow, less harsh. Science Officer Vrax looked up from her station. The Emperor will expect a report on our conquest, she said. Zexos's mandibles moved in what might have been a smile. Yes, and I will give him one. Commander Krill, standing nearby, understood. The other 17 species we conquered, he said quietly. They deserve to know what we now know. Zexos nodded. The humans could have destroyed us. They could have turned us into slaves. Instead, they chose to share something precious with us. Something worth more than all the conquered worlds in the Dominion. In the United Earth Defense Headquarters, General Chen received the news of the Krell fleet's departure. "They're heading directly to the Dominion capital," Colonel Jackson reported. "Do you think it worked as we hoped?" Chen touched the pendant around her neck, a small model of Earth, a gift from her grandmother. "Protocol Omega has never failed," she said. "The Krell went from seeing us as prey to understanding us as people. But what they do with that understanding is up to them." Jackson looked troubled. "And if they come back with a way to shield themselves from the resonance?" Chen's expression remained calm. "Then we'll face that challenge when it comes. Humanity has always adapted. It's what we do best." 6 months later, news reached Earth through Federation channels. The Krell Dominion had undergone a peaceful but profound revolution. The old Emperor had stepped down. The 17 conquered species had been granted independence and invited to join a new alliance, one based on cooperation rather than domination. Grand Admiral Zexos, now serving as an advisor to the new government, had been quoted as saying, "We thought physical strength was the measure of a species' worth. We were wrong. The humans taught us that the true measure is how you treat those who are different from you." Professor Li Wei, fully recovered from his role in Protocol Omega, read the news with satisfaction. A representative from the new Krell Alliance had requested permission to visit Earth, not as conquerors, but as students. They wanted to learn more about human history, human art, human philosophy. The Federation had updated its classification of Earth once again. It was still labeled a death world, and humans were still classified as paradoxical deathworlders. But now there was an additional note. Primary defensive capability, empathic resonance. Approach with peaceful intentions only. "Professor." Lee smiled as he poured himself another cup of tea. The Krell had come expecting to find weakness. Instead, they had discovered humanity's true strength, not in weapons or technology or physical prowess, but in something far more powerful. Something that had allowed a physically fragile species to survive on a death world and reach for the stars. Something that had turned would-be conquerors into allies without firing a single shot. The paradox of humanity wasn't that they had survived despite their physical limitations. It was that those very limitations had forced them to develop something far more powerful than claws or armor or venom. They had developed understanding. The Krell had classified humans as weak. Now they understood the truth. On a harsh world that should have destroyed them, humans had developed the ultimate weapon, the ability to share their suffering and their hope, their failures and their triumphs. And in doing so, they had found a way to turn enemies into friends, without shedding a drop of blood. It was a lesson the galaxy was only beginning to learn, a lesson about the true power of being human.